I am your president, Heather Doyle. Please join with me in singing America, My Country 'Tis of Thee, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Invocation by Ms. Julie Ross. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Ross.
Today, of course, is the anniversary of 9/11. We want to be ever mindful of that. But I thought maybe we could take a moment to practice gratitude. What are we grateful for? We're grateful to come together as a club. We're in this beautiful place. We're here to enjoy a good meal together. And while doing it, we can serve our beautiful community. We're grateful for all these things and thank and praise the one who has made it all possible. Amen.
Amen. Please enjoy your fellowship. We'll see you in about 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. We're so glad you could all join us for this very special program on this very important day. First off, let's go ahead and welcome our guests. Mac, come on up.
All right, we do have a number of guests this afternoon, and we want to really give them a big Braden and Kiwanis welcome. So first of all, I know they're here all the time, but I just wanted to make mention, we got Charles Clapsaddle and Richard back here, so from METV. Always feel remiss by not mentioning them because they do such a great service for our community. We also have with us Sonia Cleveland, if you'll please stand. Come on. All right, that's Ed's wife, and she's here with him today. We also have Ellen Sanders. If you'll please stand up. Where's Ellen? All right.
Hi, Ellen.
And she's the wife of one of our newer members, Bill Sanders, and he's here with her. We also have with us Jeff Bowman and Daniel Anderson. If you guys will stand up.
Yes. Hi, Daniel.
We also have Jim Welch from Skyward Memorial Cemetery. And whoever provided the little cards to the chamber for giveaways, it's working. Jim's here as a result of winning one of those, our little guest cards, so we welcome you. We also have with us, in representing USF, is Reverend Greg Smogard. Where is he? Right. And we have the Lindgren family. I'll just say Lindgren family, Garrett and Nancy and Kristen. All right, somebody's setting a precedent here. Okay. And we want to welcome you all here this afternoon and hope that you have a great time and enjoy the meeting. And I have one last thing. Last week I did mention that we would still have $100,000 on the line for who can name the newest president for Kiwanis, Florida district. Does anybody? Okay, Bill, do you know it? Steve LeBlanc. Steve LeBlanc. All right, Steve LeBlanc. So pay attention to the slideshow. You never know when you might win $100,000.
On to our announcements. We're going to be doing our board meeting. For anyone that's interested in seeing how the board works, we're going to be having our board meeting. It's going to be on a Thursday instead of on a Wednesday, so it's this Thursday, September 20th. Anyone that's on the board, please make plans to attend. At this point in time, I would like to call up Bill Edwards. Bill has an announcement for our club.
I believe that it was Lyndon Johnson who came on the air on the television one night and he says, "I come to you with a heavy heart." Well, I come to you with a heavy heart, and some of you out there will understand what I'm going to say, but we have decided to retire. We've just had enough. We have, as of Monday at midnight, we have a house in Blairsville, Georgia. So I will be resigning my spot on the board of directors and the officers. We love you guys very much. I can tell you that the Blue Ridge, Georgia Club has a Kiwanis Golden Rule, and they have one of our patches, so it was very good. They welcomed us with open arms. I'm gonna miss you guys when we're not here. Before we bought the house, we also bought a 38-foot motorhome before we even thought about buying the house, because we wanted to travel some. But we're going to be off, and I'm not going to be around as much as I have been. So we love you all. We'll be thinking of you all, and thank you very much.
Bill and Angie, we are going to miss you so very much, but we're so happy for you and your retirement, and we know you're going to have so many wonderful memories. Thank you. Don't be a stranger now. I know you're coming back here. Don't be a stranger.
We're still involved in Kiwanis.
Right. Before we begin our program, I felt it was appropriate to give you some information and historical background on one of our members who is here today. 50 years ago today, Colonel Larry Bussell was shot down over Vietnam. He was rescued from the ocean. He spent months in recovery till he was well enough to fly again. Thank you, Colonel Bussell, for your service to our country. Today we remember the tragic day 17 years ago with the attack on America. Today's speakers include Chief Ed Cleveland, Deputy Chief Brett Pollock, Captain Steve Litschauer, and firefighter Garrett Lindgren of the Fire Department of New York. Today's presentation is 9/11 from a fire, law enforcement, and the human perspective. Chief Ed Cleveland, would you please come to the podium?
Thank you, Heather. 17 years ago, at this moment in time, as we sit here today near the Manatee River and the memorial that honors the fallen firefighters of Manatee County, a horror that none of us could ever have imagined was unfolding in New York City and in Washington, D.C., and in a farmer's field in Pennsylvania. But today, New York is approaching another terrible milestone. Nearly 10,000 people have suffered cancers linked to the dust and smoke at Ground Zero. With the 17th anniversary of the September 11th terror attacks upon us, the World Trade Center Health Program has counted 9,795 first responders, downtown workers, residents, students, and others with cancer-related, deemed 9/11 related. In all, more than 1,700 responders and others affected have died, including 420 of those stricken with cancer. Sadly, we are approaching the fact that more people will have died from diseases contracted at the World Trade Center than died on 9/11. 9/11 is still killing, said John Field, an advocate for the World Trade Center responders. Sadly, this fragile community of heroes and survivors is shrinking by the day. It is estimated that some 70,000 people are carrying some disease directly related at being at, near, or working at the recovery in New York City on or after 9/11. The number of cancer patients has rapidly risen since the federal program started tracking the diseases in 2013. We get these referrals 15 or 20 times a week, said Dr. Michael Crane, medical director of the World Trade Center Health Program at Mount Sinai Hospital. The increase is not surprising. Cancers have various latency periods, typically emerging years after exposure to hazardous chemicals and substances. In addition, the average age of ground zero workers affected and others that are affected has risen from 38 to 55 years. Some are in their 70s. But epidemiology studies have confirmed that 9/11 rescue and recovery workers have significantly higher rates of thyroid cancer and skin melanoma, which is potentially fatal, than found in the general population, and they face a higher risk of bladder cancer. Non-responders have had significantly higher rates of breast cancer and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Cancers raising red flags include leukemia and other blood cell disorders. The growing tally of lost 9/11 heroes include FDNY firefighter John McNamara, who died of colon cancer at age 44. Veteran firefighter Ray Pfeiffer, 59, and John McKee, 49, a top City University of New York official who joined the search and rescue efforts. The living cancer victims face an ongoing struggle. When the first plane struck, then NYPD Sergeant Tom Wilson raced from the 90th Precinct in Brooklyn to man the Williamsburg Bridge as people fled Manhattan on foot. In the coming months, Wilson worked 344 hours at Ground Zero, sometimes sleeping at the site. And then he worked at the Fresh Kills landfill, where workers sifted through the debris for remains. Wilson soon developed gastrointestinal and sinus problems, but was struck with an aggressive tongue cancer in 2008. Memorial Sloan Kettering University doctors cut off a third of Wilson's tongue, replacing it with a skin graft from his wrist. 6 weeks of head and neck radiation damaged blood vessels in his jaw, causing it to slowly deteriorate. Now in frequent pain, Wilson will eventually need a reconstructed jaw using a bone from his leg or shoulder. But the father of 5 who left the NYPD for the Suffolk County Police Department closer to home is grateful to be alive and has not lost his passion for public service. He says, "I probably could go on disability, but working is my therapy. It helps me. God forbid there's another 9/11. I want to be able to respond to that." And it isn't just first responders like firefighters and police officers. There's Debbie Morales, then a 23-year-old receptionist for the National Coffee Association. She stepped out of the subway into mayhem as the Twin Towers burned. She says, "There are things I saw I can never undo." Over the next few weeks, Morales spent hours at a time in her wrecked office retrieving paperwork for colleagues. "I had dust all over me." 8 years later, Morales noticed she could not understand what a TV reporter was saying. Then she suffered 2 seizures at work. She was diagnosed with advanced brain cancer and underwent an 8-hour surgery to remove most of a tumor. Married and hoping to have kids, Morales delayed chemotherapy to go through a process to harvest and freeze some of her eggs, but complications blocked her dreams. She now says, "I'm fearful about everything since 9/11. I was never like that before. I feel that thing just took everything away." You see, 9/11 didn't end on September 11th, 2001. It didn't end for those there that day, for those that worked in their regular jobs in the area, and it doesn't end for us here today. Some will suffer with diabolical diseases, some with memories they will never be able to escape, and some from the reminder that our country and its citizens were attacked and murdered. You've heard it said before, and you will hear it said many times again today and in the days to come. Never forget.
You know, while only 4 years old, Max loved aviation, and he wanted to go see Air Force One, that national symbol of freedom wherever the president traveled. We snapped pictures of that magnificent aircraft with Max proudly standing in the foreground. Never would I have believed what would transpire the next day. Tuesday morning began as usual. I lived out in Mill Creek. I had a nice leisurely drive into town. Went through the morning briefings with my oncoming and offgoing shift, and things were just fine. Around 8:55, one of my fire inspectors walked into my office and asked me if I had heard about a small plane that had flown into one of the towers. You know, when you hear something like that, you begin to wonder, wow, how could that have happened? You know, things were just not adding up. We both walked over to the station, to the fire station where the TV was focused on the towers. To my horror, a large plane did strike one of the towers. A huge gaping hole with plumes of toxic, thick, black smoke billowed from the intense fire. The New York City firefighters were facing something unimaginable. It wasn't until a live close-up shot from miles away did I realize the magnitude of the incident. As I continued watching the television, a small flash appeared on the right side of the screen. Then a massive explosion occurred with debris raining down from the second tower. It didn't take me much longer to realize that we were under attack, and the City of New York firefighters were right in the middle of it. Minute by minute, firefighters from New York City responded to the scene. Minute by minute, those firefighters went into the towers. Minute by minute, they expected to rescue hundreds, maybe thousands of people, and to fight the raging fire. Minute by minute, workers from the World Trade Center evacuated the burning buildings that morning. And minute by minute, those firefighters did their jobs. Playing incident commander from 1,200 miles away, I could not believe the intensity of the fire. I could not believe the trapped victims hanging out the windows, desperately trying to signal someone to rescue them, and their final act of escape, leaping from the burning towers. My thoughts turned to, how long are these towers going to remain standing? How many people are still in the towers? How many firefighters and other first responders were remaining in the towers? Well, we know today. Today we know that the building didn't remain standing as long as designers led the firefighters to believe. Today we know that the attack killed nearly 3,000 people, including 343 firefighters from the city of New York. Not since the attacks on Pearl Harbor had the fire service lost firefighters in the line of duty. That December 7th day, 3 firefighters from the Honolulu Fire Department lost their lives in that attack. The significance of the day continued to grip us. The tragic collapse of both towers, President Bush in Sarasota, Air Force One sitting on the tarmac. What could take place here, I thought. The former fire chief of the airport fire department told me that he was one of several people to get a tour of Air Force One when a government official frantically began ushering them off the plane, saying, "The president is on his way back, and we're going to depart immediately." We watched TV as Air Force One took off. As soon as it took off, we walked out to our ramp in front of our station to see it rise above the trees at a steep angle, flying to the west over Sarasota Bay towards the Gulf. Reports of suspicious vehicles on Longboat Key and in the area of the airport fueled the terrorist threat locally. I remember discussing with our fire chief about securing the stations, locking the exterior doors, closing the apparatus bays and hurricane shutters. An emergency meeting of the Manatee County Fire Chiefs was called that afternoon. The chiefs discussed station security and firefighter safety. A day or two later, the Fire Chiefs Association met with the Law Enforcement Council made up of the county sheriff and police chiefs within the county. This had never taken place in my 20 years. Sensitive information was provided to all first responders, and a follow-up meeting was going to take place several days later. That tragic day brought out operational deficiencies within our own county fire departments. That being, we did not function operationally the same. Basically, we were doing our own thing. That eventually led to the creation of the Manatee County Fire Chiefs Association recommended operating guidelines, which all fire departments agreed to work operationally the same on incidents within Manatee County. And I'm proud to say the ROGs continue today. However, new guidelines have had to be added, such as active shooter, response to wildfires, and other types of emergencies. That tragic day brought more cooperation between law enforcement and the fire service. Are we better prepared today? Yes, we are. Is sharing of information better than it was on September 11th? Absolutely. You see, after September 11th, the fire service began receiving sensitive information in a timely manner from local, state, and federal agencies. That September 11th evening, 17 years ago, I had to explain to my child that innocent people were lost that day, including a lot of firefighters, law enforcement officers, and other first responders. As a 4-year-old then, I'm sure he could not understand why firefighters would not be coming home and why law enforcement officers and other first responders would not be going home, and the many families that probably would never see their loved ones again. In fact, I talked with Max last night. I asked him what he remembered. He remembered being at his grandmother's house that day and watching the television coverage shortly after the first plane hit the tower. He remembers nothing else. Why do we remember? Why do we hold memorials annually here at the Riverwalk like we did this morning and around the nation? Why do we build memorials in New York, the Pentagon, and Shanksville? So we never forget. So we never forget the brave firefighters, law enforcement, EMS personnel, and those who continue to suffer today 17 years ago.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to approach it on a little bit different approach. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and try to keep it on a local basis. A lot of you have known me, and so some of this may not be new, but in 2 months I celebrate 45 years as a law enforcement officer. 40 of those years with the sheriff's office and 5 with the police department. If I actually added in, I'm one of the success stories about, and trying to see where he's at, scouting. I started as an explorer with the Boy Scouts of America when I was 16 years old here in Manatee County. I retired out as a captain. I was a divisional commander of legal and support services along with emergency services. Here in Manatee County Emergency Services takes in the support for the SWAT team, hostage negotiations, and all types of emergencies, including disaster response. I've held ranks in all of the law enforcement bureaus and retired once, got tired, went back, worked another 7 years, and the county recruited me, and currently I'm second in charge over emergency management. But I still carry my badge, I still carry my gun, because I still am a reserve officer, still working with the career and sex offenders and emergency services. So I haven't given up yet, Bill. I hope you enjoy retirement better. So, as Brett, I was beginning to think Brett read some of my speech or whatever. That morning of September 11th, like every other Tuesday morning, Neil will know what I'm talking about, the command staff of the Sheriff's Office meets every Tuesday morning. That particular time, we're meeting up at Port Manatee. But not everyone was there. Our sheriff was in Longboat Key, as Brett alluded, with the President of the United States. As he alluded, Air Force One was sitting in Manatee County. That's something hard to think about. The sheriff was with or in the area when the President was notified. But as we're sitting in the room waiting for the sheriff to come to our meeting, someone came in and mentioned a plane had run into the World Trade Center. Like everybody else around, including probably most of you, we thought, what could have happened? Did they go astray? Whatever. So we turned on a TV, and as we watched the second plane run into the towers, we were amazed and shocked as everyone else. The thing to remember about this area is the Sun Coast of Florida, from that day and forevermore, will be remembered as the area where the terrorists learned to fly, just south of here in Venice. I do not know that many of you did know about Air Force One being in here, or the President being with, that time, Sheriff Charlie Wells and not Ricky, but he was here. And if you could imagine the tension when the leader of our nation was in our community and we had our first attack on our ground. Our SWAT team, including several other personnel who are normally on a presidential detail, were already deployed because of the President being there. Through my career, I've been fortunate enough to be on 5 different presidential protection details, and actually I was honored to have worked at 2 presidential inaugurations in D.C. The security for the President on any given day is second to none. If you can just imagine when that happened, what everyone was thinking. That day forever changed the approach of law enforcement and continues to take active incidences currently. It was really the first time that we faced individuals who had no desire or attention or intentions to survive their unlawful actions. Unfortunately, a lot of those same approaches are now being used in active shooter incidences and protections. We have to look back, and currently what we're having to look at on active shooters in the schools, in the malls, in the airports are the same type of terrorism we approached back at 9/11. Prior to 9/11, as a command officer, I rarely carried a firearm on my person because I wore a polo shirt or a coat and tie and sat in the office. But that day, and for many years to go, my weapon was on me. Usually it was nearby, but I never carried it. And then most everybody carried it off duty. We have seen so many security changes over the years. And if you are like me, we all get frustrated when we go to the airport, have to take our belts off, have to take our shoes off, but that's for your protection. There are other screenings at governmental buildings. Someone, I'm not sure here today, at the Pirates, at sports stadiums, Tropicana Field, the Pirates, Disney World, and so forth. Now you get screened. And I'm sure you get aggravated when you do have to do that, but it's for our protection. There's also increased screening procedures still in effect. The one thing I can remember is The October following September the 11th, I was in Canada at the International Associations to Police's annual conference. Upon leaving in Canada, I started to board the plane and I was stopped. What I was doing was wearing a poppy. Everybody remembers the poppy? It had a stick pin. They were so tight on security, they confiscated the stick pin. To this date, there is still an increased protection of critical facilities, such as governmental buildings, bridges, power plants, and other related facilities. Obviously, I cannot go into details of their protections. Their building plans and as such are confidential, but I can tell you still to this day, what we call critical facilities are still monitored, watched, and patrolled intensively. Immediately following the attacks, the Sheriff's Office recruited veterans and actually armed them in assistance of protection of key facilities and areas. Very much similar to what they're doing now with the guardians in the school. That went on for a period of time. Actually, the county building at the time locked itself down. There was only one way in and one way out with a guarded person. Also, immediately following the attacks, we saw Americans coming together. No matter what political party they were, what race, what ethnic group they were, what social status they were, or what income level they were all Americans. People put flags on their cars and also flew American flags at their homes. My research showed that over 3,000 first responders and citizens lost their lives. Hundreds of thousands of heroic military members have served the United States since. Almost 2,400 military members have lost their lives, and over 20,000 servicemen and women have been wounded. We must not only pray for our military members, but also for our first responders who protect our homeland every day and each and every day. Then and now, all law enforcement, fire, and EMS and other first responders in Manatee County have worked together. Y'all have such a good relationship here in Manatee County. There's many, many places in the state, outside the country, that because my uniform is green and theirs are blue, we wouldn't even sit at the same table. And I can tell you in Manatee County back then, and it continues, and that's one of the great benefits we have, that we can sit down, we can work together, we have worked together, and we will continue to work together. We must all support the United States no matter what the political party we are, and remember, we are one nation under God. Thank you, and God bless America. And now it is my great pleasure and honor to pass the remainder of my time of the program on to my friend and my brother Garrett from the FDNY, whose experience and his stories is so amazing. A true hero, and my brother Garrett.
Good afternoon. My story started, I guess, and I'll get through it quickly, but it started when I was a little boy. And my dad was a New York City firefighter. He was a World War II veteran. He fought in the European theater. And he was bigger than life to me. Physically, he was 6'4" and over 200 pounds. He was a big guy. And growing up with him as my dad was, it was just awesome. I just wanted to be exactly like him. 10 years old, he woke me up on a Saturday morning and said, "Hey, you're coming to work with me today." I don't know if he knew what can of worms he was going to open, but he brought me into the firehouse, and by that time he was a battalion chief, and I rode with him for his 9-hour day shift. And he had me up in the front seat, operating the siren. He had me talking on the radio to the dispatcher. And, well, that became a regular thing after a while. If it was a weekend and Dad was working and I was off from school, I was there. The dispatchers eventually nicknamed me Chief Lindgren Jr. because I was on the radio a lot, giving reports and whatever. So I was hooked, and I worked very hard in my late teens to start working out for the civil service test for firefighter. It was a 50-50 operation back then, 50% cognitive, 50% physical ability. So I went to school and studied for the written test, and I went to a different school and worked on the strength and cardio fitness portion. I was very fortunate. I did really well, and eventually got on the job. Was what I wanted. I went to very busy houses by choice. Sought after places to work. A lot of guys in the fire service, they want to go, go, go. They're trained to save lives and to save property, and most firefighters you talk to anywhere in the country, they want to do the job they're trained to do. They don't want to see you lose your property. They don't want to see anyone hurt or anyone killed, but if something happens, they want to be there because they feel that there's a good chance they can make a difference. That was my way, and I was so fortunate to work in the places I worked in, worked with some really, really great people over the years, and probably responded to just about anything you could imagine. You know, childbirths, shootings, stabbings, car extrications, building collapses, scuba rescue, hazmat incident, you name it, we did it. And, you know, it was always a matter of, as soon as they told us we were released from the scene, our officer would call our chauffeur on the radio and say, hey, tell the dispatcher we're available. Because we wanted to go again right away, no matter how beat up we were, no matter how tired we were. And I kind of felt like I'd seen it all. September 10th of 2001, I worked overtime on a day tour in a squad company in Queens, which is part of Special Operations Command. And I worked to pay back a shift, a night shift, that night in Rescue Company 4 in Queens. There's 4 heavy rescues in the city, 1 in each borough. And the heavy rescue goes to every working fire in the borough they're in, and any unusual occurrence, whether it's a train derailment, a plane crash, dive rescue, high angle rescue, whatever it is, or again, working fires. So I went to Rescue 4 and I worked the night tour there. And I guess about 6:45 in the morning, I was sitting in the kitchen toward the end of the shift, having a cup of coffee, reading the paper, the TV was on. And one of the young guys, one of the new guys in Rescue 4 named Pete Brennan came in to work. And tradition on our job, if somebody's working a shift in a firehouse that's not their normally assigned house, the first firefighter that comes in for the next shift will let that person go, and because theoretically you're going to have to travel some distance to get back where you came from and whatever, and just a courtesy. So Pete immediately offered for me to go home, and I said, "No, I'm good. My wife's working today. The kids are in school. I'm in no hurry. Maybe we'll catch a job before the end of the tour." And he said, okay, and he let somebody else go. And a little while later, one of the brothers came in, and same thing, and I said, I'm going to ride right till the end of the shift at 9 o'clock. Maybe we'll catch something. And that went on until, I guess, about 8:30, when a fellow that we called Taz, because he had a very long last name, Polish last name, that I still can't pronounce. God bless you, Taz. He worked in Rescue 5 in Staten Island, and he was working overtime on 9/11, the morning of 9/11 in Rescue 4. He came in, he sat down, started to drink his coffee, and we started chatting a little bit, and then he said, are you working here today? And I said, no, I'm getting off this morning. He said, well, get out of here, I'll ride for you. I said, everybody that came in offered already, I'm going to ride till the end of the tour. Taz was a Marine. He didn't give up. It was, come on, you got to go, you got to go, you got to go see your family, go back to Rescue 3 where I normally worked, see the guys, and he just wanted to start riding. So finally he wore me down. We walked out to the apparatus together. I took my bunker gear out of the rig, and I said, I was a forcible entry guy last night. That's where you ride, right here. He put his gear in the rig. I shook hands with him and said, I'll see you, next time around that you float into the Bronx or I float into Staten Island. and that was it. I hopped in my car, and my next stop was going to be my firehouse, Rescue 3 in the Bronx. And I was specifically going there to have a cup of coffee with a friend of mine named Brian Hickey, who was the captain of Rescue 4 in Queens, but he was working overtime in Rescue 3 that day because my captain was at his dive recertification. So I got out of the firehouse, got onto the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. There was no traffic, and in a matter of a couple of minutes, I was on the Triborough Bridge. And those of you who aren't familiar with that, it connects 3 boroughs. It connects Queens, Manhattan, and the Bronx. I was casually listening to a morning talk show on AM radio, and I was half asleep from having worked 24 hours. And they broke into the talk show and said, there's a fire at the World Trade Center. We don't know anything else about it yet, but we will update you when we do. Couple of seconds, and I said, wait, the World Trade Center is just to my left. And I'm thinking in my mind, it's probably something minor. It's probably an elevator motor overheated, or the FDNY, I think, used to go to the World Trade Center to one or another of the buildings there probably 10, 15 times a shift. You know, alarms going off, medical emergencies. It's, you know, it was a vertical city, really. I didn't think a whole lot of it. I didn't even expect to see anything when I looked to the left. And when I looked to the left, I saw that massive gaping hole in the North Tower. And I don't know, maybe 8 floors heavily involved in fire and a tremendous smoke condition that was already rising and heading toward New Jersey. My immediate thought was that someone had detonated the bomb on the upper floors. I think we're all aware, back in '93, some radical Islamic terrorists set off a truck bomb and tried to take the towers down. They put it in the parking garage underneath. And they were caught and they were arrested, and one of them told the FBI, we'll be back, and the next time we're going to bring the towers down. And that's a fact. I even met that FBI agent that they said that to after 9/11. I met him. So that was my thought process. We were being schooled and trained at the time for response to weapons of mass destruction incidents. The thought was that there was going to be a sarin gas attack in the subways, and we were doing, at odd hours, they'd bring us in on overtime and do a full hands-on sarin gas scenario in the subways. And that was really where they were looking at that point in time. They decided to do it with airliners instead. I wasn't into the Bronx yet when they said a small plane had hit the towers. And at that point, I had already seen the damage, and I knew it couldn't be a small plane. If it was a plane, it was an airliner. And I knew that those towers were supposed to be able to withstand, I think, a hit from a 727, but I could be wrong. But it was a substantial sized airliner that the towers were built to withstand. Before I got into the Bronx, the second plane hit, and that went into the South Tower. Now I was driving as quickly as I safely could, heading for Rescue 3, my firehouse in the Bronx. I got there, they had already responded to the scene. So I was going upstairs to call everybody that was off duty. It was just on my own. I was going to do it to make sure they all knew, and I knew everybody would head in because I knew that we were going to need every person we possibly could get. This was uncharted territory for us. You know, we did a lot of things, but this was bigger than any firefighter or a police officer ever saw in their lives anywhere. Before I got a couple of steps even up the stairs to go to the office to start calling in the personnel, my captain and 2 firefighters who had been at dive recertification, they canceled that as soon as the towers got hit. They came in the front door of the firehouse, and my captain said, whatever you're doing, stop, grab your gear, throw it in my car. We're going to special ops on Randall's Island. On Roosevelt Island. And they're going to provide us with a spare heavy rescue rig. We got to equip it. We're going in service. All 5 rescues are at the Trade Center. we're going to go in service. They're afraid there's going to be another terror attack, and we got to have a heavy rescue to handle it. So we fought traffic. We got to Roosevelt Island. The rescue truck wasn't there yet. It was on the way, but wasn't there. We started amassing equipment, and I was loading a fire department van outside when over our dispatch frequency came a very urgent sounding voice of a firefighter yelling on the radio without even identifying what unit he was. The South Tower of the World Trade Center just collapsed. And I looked south from Roosevelt Island, and you couldn't see the tip of Manhattan at all. So I knew he wasn't exaggerating. That tower was down. Ran inside, grabbed my captain, and said, "Hey, Cap, major collapse." They said the South Tower is completely down. He called headquarters. Don't know who he spoke to because most of headquarters was at the scene. And he said, "We're not waiting for that truck, and we're not going in service as a rescue for the rest of the city. All the 5 rescues are already at this thing. They're probably trapped. We're going there to do what we can do." We took the fire department van. We took a reserve pumper. We threw everything on it we could, spare cylinders, tools, whatever. And I think there was 12 of us. And we started responding. Went through the Queens Midtown Tunnel, got stuck in traffic coming out of the tunnel. By that point, I called my wife on my cell phone because I could not fathom that I was going to survive or that the 11 guys with me were going to survive. As I said earlier, it was bigger than anything any of us had ever seen. And I never thought that way. It didn't matter what was going over the radio when we were responding to an incident, no matter how scary it sounded, no matter what we saw in the sky as we approached the scene. We were gung-ho, and we knew our jobs well, and we just said, "Hey, we're going to work. We're going to help people. We're going to take this and handle it." That day, I knew I had to be there. I knew we all had to be there. I knew tens of thousands of people were going to be trapped and that we were going to have to do our best to try to get them. I couldn't imagine we were going to survive. Never thought like that in my life. So I called my wife. She was at work. She already knew what was going on because I had called her when the first plane hit. And I said, "We're on our way. We'll be there in a few minutes. A lot of us are going to die there." And that's a terrible thing to tell your wife. But I had to tell her because there was a good chance it was going to be the last time she ever heard my voice. So I told her, and I said, "I can't stay on the phone. We're almost there. I love you, and please tell the kids I love them and give them a kiss and give them a hug, and, we got to go to work." And that was it. Right after I spoke to her, the North Tower fell, probably 5 minutes later, maybe a little less. And we arrived right after that to zero visibility and like snow on the ground. I mean, it was deep. The dust from the towers was really deep. It was eerily quiet, and I guess it was that heavy coating of dust that just muffled, just like, well, I don't know how many, I'm sure some of you folks are transplants, so you've been in blizzards, and when you go out of your house during a blizzard, it's very quiet, it's very muffled, and that's how it was there when we got there. Couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We had to abandon our apparatus because we were afraid we were going to run people over that were laying in the street. We couldn't see them. Got our tools, started to walk toward where we thought the towers were. We couldn't see anything, couldn't see street signs, couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It was the way it is when we operate inside a burning building. You can't see anything. It's zero visibility in a working fire. And we're trained to crawl and keep a hand on the wall so that we have an idea where we are, we have an idea what areas we've searched and haven't searched, and we have an idea how we can get out quickly if things deteriorate. It was like that, only we were outside. It turned out we were on West Street. We didn't even know that. We heard nobody on the radio initially on our fireground radios. There were hundreds of fireground radios on the scene, firefighters equipped with these radios. Normally, an incident like this, again, uncharted territory, an incident like this would have been communications overload. You wouldn't have been able to get a word in edgewise with the amount of traffic that would have been going over the air. There was not one transmission on the radio. It was dead quiet. My captain got on the radio and said, "Captain Tizo to Rescue 3." And he unkeyed. You could hear the click when he unkeyed. Nothing. He waited a couple of seconds. "Captain Tizo to Rescue 3." Nobody answered. No one at all on the radio. And one of the guys in my group, I couldn't see him, so I can't tell you who it was because we couldn't see each other. But he said, "Oh my God, everybody's dead." And I still get chills when I say that. It's 17 years later. You know, we really thought at that moment, we said, you know what? It's very possible. It could be that there are hundreds and hundreds of cops and firemen that are dead here, you know? And we got there, like I say, we got there right after the second tower came down. So those survivors, the responders that were survivors, were totally disoriented at that point. They just experienced the second collapse and they couldn't breathe. And, you know, they had all this debris in their mouths and their noses, and they were laying all over the place. We couldn't even see them. Finally, we heard a transmission on the radio, and the transmission was Mayday, 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 which in the FDMY and a lot of fire departments around the country, a Mayday means either there's a firefighter down, a firefighter trapped, or a collapse, or imminent signs of collapse. That's when we give a Mayday, and that means everybody on the radio shut up. The incident commander is going to take control of this and speak directly with the person giving the Mayday. This fellow gives his Mayday, and you could hear he was in pain and he was hurt, and he said, this is, I think it was Engine 65 chauffeur, which is the driver pump operator on an engine company. There's been a major collapse. I'm trapped under my apparatus. I'm hooked up to a hydrant on, say, West and Bessie. I don't remember where he said he was. He knew exactly where he positioned his rig. He was hooked up to a hydrant, and he was ready to supply the standpipe system. And the tower came down. He dove under the rig. He said, "I'm injured. I'm pinned. I can't move at all." But he's saying where he is. So one of the guys in our group just said, "All right, brother, we're going to get you." And we all said to each other, "Where the heck is he?" I mean, we can't see. We can't see street signs if they even existed. We can't see anything. And this is acres and acres and acres around of two 110-story buildings totally collapsed. You know, every step was dangerous because, like I say, you couldn't see, and you could go from just walking in some debris to suddenly hitting a spot that's like 10 stories of debris. And then you go down a little bit, and then you go through, basically tunnel through an area. It was massive confusion trying to do your job. Eventually, some firefighters, I don't know who they were, they did eventually find that firefighter that was trapped under the pumper, and they, after a long extrication, they were able to get him out and get him on a backboard, and they saved him. He did live. There were other stories like that. Eventually, here and there, we would hear a Mayday, but for the most part, all we heard were firefighters' pass devices going off everywhere. And a pass device is an electronic device on each firefighter's breathing apparatus where if they become immobile for more than less than a minute, it's a small amount of time, seconds, it does a pre-alert, and if the firefighter doesn't quickly move and reset that, it goes into full alert. It almost sounds like a smoke alarm, but it alerts us that a firefighter is down and needs help. We heard hundreds of them going off in the pile. And you know, as the smoke started to lift, eventually, and it's probably hours into it, time stood still once I got there, honestly. I had no concept of time for that whole day. But eventually, as we searched, we'd be maybe 5 stories up on top of the pile. All that grid work from the outside of the towers were laid across streets, and we'd be walking on those pieces of steel, and you'd hear this chirping going off, and you'd look down, and there'd be a crushed fire engine down there, and you could see bunker gear, and you knew that it was a deceased firefighter. I mean, there was no way, in most of the cases that we looked down, there was no way they were alive. That went on all day. I don't recall eating that day. I don't even know if I had a bottle of water all day. I mean, we were just 110% involved in this thing, partly shock because none of us could believe what was going on. And the rest of it was, there's thousands of people missing here. A lot of them are our guys, but there's a bunch of civilians in here that worked in these buildings that I'm sure weren't able to get out in time. They came from the upper floors. Maybe there could be a confined space here or there where we're gonna find some people alive, and we were praying for that. We did end up finding, that I remember, that I saw, that I physically had my hands on their stretchers, 2 people during the course of the first day. One was a man, one was a woman. Miraculously rode the towers down. There's actually a documentary that mentions this one man and followed up his life after the Trade Center. But for the most part, there was nobody to rescue. It was dust and steel and horrible carnage that I never ever speak about in mixed company, because nobody is supposed to see what we saw. Nobody's supposed to touch what we saw. It'll go to the grave with all of us. It's more challenging than I can ever imagine. And certainly, I mean, there's some brother firefighters here. I know you've all seen some terrible tragedies over the years, as we did too. None of us ever saw something like this. It was probably worse than a day at war, as far as the amount of people that were missing and that were killed. I guess it got to be about 11, 12 o'clock at night. Suddenly, one of the guys came up with the bright idea, let's go find water. We got to drink some water. As I say, I don't know if I had any all day. I can't remember a lot of what went on that day. Maybe that's a defense mechanism. I don't really know. So we came off the pile. Some really great civilians, lots of civilians came the first day. And these people just wanted to help us any way they could. And they were handing out bottles of water on West Street. They gave us a bottle of water, and we started to drink the water. And all of a sudden, I see a firefighter from my company, from Rescue 3, coming toward me. I hadn't seen him all day. And as he's coming toward me, he's calling my name, and he's looking at me with this very strange expression on his face. And he gets up to me, and he throws his arms around me, and he kissed me on the side of my head, and he said, "Thank God you're alive." And I said, "Thank God you're alive." And he stepped back, and he looked at me, and he goes, "Oh, wow, you don't know." I said, "What?" He said, "You're on the missing list." I was still on the riding list from Rescue 4, and they had pulled the riding lists out of every truck they could access to start getting an idea of who was on duty when this incident occurred. But there was a lot of confusion because it was just before the change of shifts, so there were new guys that jumped on. There were guys that got off duty that just jumped back on and went, so some of the units responded with double the personnel they normally would have. So my name is at the command post on this big board saying that I'm missing with the guys from Rescue 4. And at that moment, it clicked, and I said, oh my God. The last time I spoke to my wife was right before the North Tower came down. I told her a lot of us are gonna die there. She's watching this on TV. The timing was perfect for me to end up being under the North Tower. And I guarantee that by now, somebody has told somebody who told somebody Garrett's missing. And she's probably been getting phone calls, kind of filling her out, and maybe people showing up at the house, and I gotta get in touch with her. I had my cell phone in my uniform shirt, and I told the guys with me, I said, let's go over by the Hudson River and I'll call my wife real quick, let her know I'm alive, and then all you guys use my phone and call up and tell your loved ones you're one of the lucky ones. So I called. My wife tells me later that the caller ID lit up with my cell number on it, and she assumed somebody found my phone because she was positive I had been killed. And she picks up the phone and answers it, and it's me. And she said she collapsed, in the kitchen, just fell to her knees. We spoke briefly because I wanted to let everybody else call, their loved ones. And I just told her, I said, look, I don't want to get this out yet because nobody's been properly notified, but everybody that was on duty in Rescue 3 is missing, and they're probably dead. A couple of the guys that were off duty were probably on the rig too. We're not sure, but they probably were. And a lot of guys that we know that I've worked with over the years in different houses where we knew their kids and we've been to firehouse picnics with them. I said, a lot of these guys are gone. And everybody else made their phone calls, and then we went back on the pile for a couple hours. Probably 2 o'clock in the morning, they pulled half my company off the pile, and it was all of us who had gotten there very quickly and had been there too long. And by then, the chiefs that were alive, because our chief of department was killed in the collapse, many of our staff chiefs were killed in the collapse. Our deputy commissioner was killed in the collapse. So we had like deputy chiefs running the incident, and they're several layers down in the command staffing or from who would normally be running an incident this big. But they did an amazing job. Somehow they brought order to this over the first 24 hours. They finally got a hold of my unit, and they said, whatever guys were here all day, you got to go. You got to go back to the firehouse, get a couple hours. So we got in the back of my lieutenant's pickup truck, and it was the first time I ever left an incident in 21 years on the job where we were sitting in the back of a pickup truck driving away from a massive fire where hundreds of our guys were missing. We never leave a brother behind. We never leave an incident. If there's a collapsed building and a firefighter's missing, everybody stays. Everybody from home just shows up and volunteers. We were leaving. We never, ever would do that. But we had already come to the realization this is going to be months. And, you know, that's how it played out from there. But that was my life from the day before 9/11 to the day after. Basically went from being a really happy guy who loved his job to total chaos, unthinkable chaos in seconds. It went from a beautiful day to my life was changed forever. So that's pretty much it. I'm sure you folks have things to do, but I appreciate your attention, and thank you so much for honoring, all the people that suffered that day and that are suffering since. Thank you very much.
Will you please stay standing? It's unusual for me to do this or our club to do this. We began in prayer. I think it's appropriate for us to end in prayer. Would you please bow your heads? Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing these men to us today to have us remember a tragic, terrible loss that we as a country suffered. Please give us the strength to send all of our thoughts, all of our prayers to all of those that served, all of those that continue to serve, and all of those that lost loved ones on that tragic day of murder. Because of these men, we will never forget. We would have never forgotten, but now we are so thankful to them for being here today to remind us to never forget, and for all the things that they, their brethren, and our United States of America has given to us, and that is incumbent upon us to give unto them. We pray this in your name. Amen. Amen. May God bless America.